mentors say about you in 35 years? It's a question I worry about. As a professional who deals in training and management, I have had an effect on a great many lives, as most of you here today have. I view my role as helping to improve their performance by sharing with them my knowledge and my so-called wisdom. And I am constantly questioning how effective I am and what they might be thinking about me. This feeling of overwhelming responsibility was instilled in me back in my 8th grade year in a small town in upstate New York where I grew up. That's the first year that I can remember having a serious mentoring relationship. My mentor's name was Dumbledore. Now, I know a few of you are thinking, Larry's tripping at Harry Potter. But I assure you, long before there was a Dumbledore, there was a Dumbledore. It's kind of funny that I should remember him so fondly because my first memory of Jack Dumbledore was him standing in front of me as my head was careening off a steel locker. You see, back then my timing wasn't very good, meaning I was always opening my mouth at the wrong time. And Jack Dumbledore wasn't a very big guy, maybe 5'4" or 5, but he was powerful, which I found out as my head careened off the locker the second time. The mouth, the timing thing again. That was the beginning of my 8th grade year and our semi-formal introduction. Jack Dumbledore was my American history teacher. I was not especially interested in American history, but he was one of those teachers that just made his subject so interesting. He was also the advisor to the school newspaper, and that intrigued me. I had been experimenting with writing, and at the urging of my mother and with encouragement from Dumbledore, I joined the newspaper staff. Besides, the staff of the paper was made up of mostly hot girls, and if you remember anything about the 8th grade, you know how potent, and I do mean potent, and incentive that was. And so, I went to work for the paper. Now, one of the great things about Dumbledore was, he would help guide you through your articles while you were writing them. But once you were finished with it, he would never edit them. He respected my opinions and my abilities, and that made me respect him even more. And so, the year went on, and I continued to write, he continued to guide me. Now, the school year was winding down, and along came June. As I said, I was raised in a small town in upstate New York, and the biggest summer event there was the Firemen's Field Days. Now, this was a small carnival concern and the main fundraiser for the local volunteer fire department. Every kid my age would save up their allowance or whatever money they could to spend on the 4 big rides that came to town. Yeah, there were only 4 of us. But that was a big deal in a town of maybe 8,000 people. Now, there was always that one big ride that took you way up in the air, jerked you around, spun you around, and plunged you to the earth. It would go through that about 59 times in 3 minutes, at which point you would get off, find a discreet place to throw up, run right back in line to do it again. You see, the more times you did it, the braver you were. The braver you were, the better your chances of linking up with one of the hot girls that was in line. You know, 8th grade. Okay? Well, field days only lasted 4 days. Every one of those days, I would rush to get my newspaper route delivered and run on down to the fairgrounds. Mr. Dumbledore lived in a house on the corner just before the fairgrounds. And as I was pedaling by, there he was in his driveway. Well, I was raised to be respectful of adults and my educators, and I think that was written on my father's belt. Anyway, I said hello to Dumbledore, and I stopped my bike. Well, he came to the end of the driveway, and we started with the usual small talk. Where was I going? As if he didn't know where every kid my age was going that night. He said, why was I coming by so late? I said, well, I had a paper out to deliver, and I had to get that done before I could go to the field days. He said, you didn't know I had that kind of responsibility, and our conversation got deeper and deeper. He asked me what my future plans were, both academically and otherwise. He asked me who my heroes were. And I gotta tell you, Mr. Dumbledore's hero was Teddy Roosevelt. You could hardly ever get out of a conversation with him that didn't have a quote by Teddy Roosevelt, or a Teddy Rooseveltism, as I called them. He was always quoting Roosevelt as saying, well, did you learn that Teddy Roosevelt, his favorite saying was bully, right? Thanks, Dumbledore, I'll never forget it. He was always quoting Roosevelt as saying, bully this, and bully that, and bully for you. And he always used that arm gesture he told me things about Teddy Roosevelt I didn't really care to know. But listen, because he was fascinated by it, and I became fascinated by Dumbledore. And when I talked about my heroes, it was with the same passion that he had for Teddy. I never made it to the field days that night. The next night was a repeat of the night before. I came bicycling by and Dumbledore stopped me again. This time we talked about the coming school year. I would be in the 9th grade, which at that point was the senior level of the junior high school. Now he hits me with, "You're going to be editor of that paper next year." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going to be editor of that paper next year." All I could think of to say was, He said that he was a student advisor and he could pick the student that he wanted. "You're already Thunder." Well, when I regained my composure, I said, "Mr. Dumbledore, I don't think I'm the right guy. Don't you have somebody with more experience that could do a little bit of a better use of Larry?" he said, with a very assured voice. "You'll be fine. You can write, and you have a good way with people. People will follow you." You know, he said it so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. He said, "Go home and think about it for a night." Never made it to the field days that night either. The next night, there he was at the end of the driveway, as if he was waiting for me. I knew I was going to stop, but I kept thinking, I'm supposed to be on that terrifying ride, losing my lunch, not talking to my American history teacher. But he made me feel so good about me that I just had to stand there, talk and listen. I told him I thought about our conversation and that I would give it a try. He then told me something that Teddy Roosevelt said about new challenges, which I don't really remember, and then he gave it a bombshell. He said, "I won't be the advisor to the school paper next year. Another teacher is taking over." Huge rush of disappointment came over me. He assured me that even though he wouldn't be the official advisor, he would still be around to guide me. He then mentioned that some of the girls on the staff would be back, you know, the hot girls, and, well, that pretty much persuaded me. After a few days, very late that night, just in time to run into my parents. No ride, no regurgitation, and no makeup with hot girls. The next day, I went to the field days, and there's no Dumbledore in the driveway. For some reason, I felt really let down. However, I did get the chance to throw up finally. Now,